And good morning, everybody. We are live for a coffee chat this morning. Happy Wednesday. For those of you who are new to this format, SoFIA goes live every other Wednesday to talk about an interesting topic that applies to the older adult population, which of course applies to all of us. For those who may not know, my name is Adi. I am the Director of Development of SoFIA, the South Florida Institute on Aging. We are a nonprofit think and act tank that empowers people as they age. On the ACT side, we provide social services like teaching older adults how to use technology. We also provide caregiver respite and friendly visits for older adults and adults with disabilities. We work with military families, veterans. We work with Broward County elementary school students through our foster grandparent program. We do a lot, so please check out our website at thesofia.com to find out more about all of our social services. And then on the think side, we are a think tank. So we bring people together to think about important issues that apply to older adults and to our communities and help us thrive. Our coffee chats are one of the things that we do as a think tank. And today we are joined by Tali Bender. She is a diversity, equity, and inclusion trainer and consultant. Talia, thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Thank you for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
So can you tell us a little bit about what is diversity, equity, and inclusion? And for future, we will abbreviate it to DEI, just to make it a little easier to say.
Yeah, definitely. So when you hear the term D&I or DEI, it's representing a couple different things. So the D stands for diversity. And so what that's referring to is who is in your workforce. What does the makeup of the individuals who are part of that community, a part of that organization, and how diverse is it? And that's referring to race, to gender, to age, to lots of other different aspects of someone's identity. And when you hear D&I, when you hear the I, that's referring to inclusion. So when you have an organization, even if it's really diverse, if some folks feel like they can't fully be comfortable in the space, or they don't feel like they belong, or that their voice isn't heard, then it doesn't really matter how diverse it is if not everyone feels like it's their space. So that's what the inclusion stands for. Now, when you see the addition of the word E or the letter E for equity, that's referring to the systems in place that actually allow for individuals, no matter what their background is, to have equal opportunity, whether it's for promotion, whether it's having their voice heard, and making sure that those systems are really equitable and fair, regardless of who you are.
Now, is this an emerging field or has this been around for a long time?
Yeah, so even though those terms might be new for some folks, this work has been going on for a really long time. So diversity training, the field of diversity consulting, actually really started as a response to the civil rights movement. And when it started, it was really founded on focusing on race and how that was showing up in the workplace. And over time, diversity, especially in the corporate sector, has become much more broad. So also focusing on other aspects of identity. And one of the reasons that folks have really been focusing now on using other terms like inclusion and equity is that it's not just about making sure that you hire people from different backgrounds so that you have a diverse workforce, but it's also about how you treat people once they're within your organization and what their opportunities are. So that shift in focus to include inclusion and equity. Over the last 10 years, there's been a big push there's been a lot of research that's been done on unconscious bias and the way that shows up in the workplace. So a lot of the diversity training has really been trending in that direction, in educating people on the ways in which our brains take these mental shortcuts that impact our ability to really think about other people in a more objective way, and that we might make decisions that rely on stereotypes. So really educating folks on unconscious bias. But it really, the issues that show up in terms of making a workplace more equitable is not just about unconscious bias. It's about the systems and the structures that are in place, because every organization, no matter where it is, exists within the context of being in a world that has systems and structures and biases that are unequal. And so a lot of what this work is doing is to change those systems and to change those ways of doing things so that everyone shows up to work and feels like they have the same opportunities for growth and for their own development and for contribution.
And when we're talking about diversity and inclusion, we're talking about race, we're talking about sexual orientation, but we're also talking about age diversity. Have I
Yeah.
missed any? Is there other types of diversity and inclusion that we want to keep at the top of our mind as we delve into this topic?
Yeah, those are really the big ones, and we talk that you see people talking about the most in terms of race, age, gender, sexual orientation. But it's so much more than that, right? So in different places, there might be different identities that where this is more comes to light. So it might also be when you're thinking about folks who are international versus folks who are born here. And there's lots of other aspects of someone's identity that could impact how welcome they feel in a space. And so it's really is intersectional, meaning that each person holds multiple different parts to their identity, and all of those things really connect and have an impact on how welcome and how included and what opportunities folks have.
So we're looking at a more holistic view of a person rather than just who they might be to a specific company between 9 to 5 in their
Yeah.
butt in their seat.
Yeah, exactly. So it really is holistic because who we are as people impacts how we show up at work, right? And how we're treated at work. And, you know, even though the conversation really diversity and inclusion, it matters in all these aspects, I think it is important to note that right now the focus really is on race, right? With George Floyd's murder and with a lot of the protests going on, a lot of companies are recognizing that one of the areas that they haven't made as much of improvement in is in that racial gap. So they may have be promoting more women now. They may be paying attention to what the age diversity looks like. Less so. I think there's a lot more work to be done in that area. But race is really the forefront and the topic of the conversation right now. But that doesn't mean that it's new, right? This has been an issue for a long time, and it's just now a big topic of conversation. And so a lot of companies and organizations are really focusing their efforts on thinking about race and thinking about how they can be anti-racist.
So at the beginning, you mentioned that this work is kind of all encompassing. So there is more systematic work that happens on a national and local governmental level to change
Mhm.
systems that have been in place for a long time and laws that have been in place in a long time. But there's also work that can happen on a more individual and company level at
Mhm.
specific organizations. So what are some of the things that corporations have been doing in recent years in order to promote environments that are not only more diverse, but also more inclusive?
Yeah, so there are, you know, so many things to do and different places to start. And just like any sort of change management, it's important to assess that specific environment to see what are the particular issues, because every organization is going to have its own unique culture. And there are some things that are universal regardless of where you work, but there are also things that are unique. So I just want to preface that that every organization is different and there's no one band-aid or silver bullet solution. So one of the big things is to actually have some sort of strategy for and philosophy for diversity, equity, and inclusion. What does your company's leadership believe? What does your organization stand for? And that can help guide decision making around these initiatives. Oftentimes organizations do hire someone to focus on this work, or they bring in consultants and trainers, and that can be really helpful, but it's not always necessary, especially for smaller organizations, as long as everyone is committed to it and is doing the work to learn more and make some changes to systems and processes. You don't necessarily need someone external or to hire someone to focus on that. And so some of it is around strategy and having a statement and having really a lot of clarity around the direction. But it really comes down to the systems and it comes down to the processes. So when you look at the recruitment hiring processes, there are so many steps in that process where someone's bias could impact who they hire. And they may not actually be hiring the right person. They might be hiring someone who looks more like them or looks more like the other folks who are already in the organization without even realizing it. So taking a look at those processes, and there's a lot of research out there and a lot of tools around how to make recruiting and hiring processes more fair. So that helps address the diversity aspect, bringing in a workforce that's more diverse. But when it comes to inclusion and making sure that everyone feels like they can belong, a lot of that comes down to assessing who gets heard in meetings, right? Who is the person who gets the final say in a decision? What does leadership look like? Is there less diversity at the top of the organization than at the bottom? And really interrogating that and making some changes so that the promotion process is fair as well. So it's really across every aspect of the employee experience where there are changes that can be made.
And this is not just in corporate America, but this is also really important to the world of nonprofits.
Yeah.
So what does a nonprofit do if their mission, if their whole purpose is very much aligned with a single religion or maybe a single cultural group?
Yeah.
How can diversity and inclusion be implemented as part of those types of nonprofit organizations?
Yeah, great. I think that's so important. And I think that before we even think about that, I think it's important to consider that for a lot of corporations, their investment in this is often initially motivated financially, right? And so in some of the work that I've done with corporations, oftentimes you have to prove to them, like, this is going to make you more money. And it's true, it does, because research shows the teams that are more diverse are more innovative. So companies that want to be more innovative, they actually show more profitability if they have higher diversity. So that's often the way with corporations that to get them to really be bought into this is to see that it impacts the bottom line. The great thing about being in a really mission-driven organization or a nonprofit is that it's likely that your mission already aligns with the core belief in making the environment more diverse or more inclusive. And so there doesn't need to be that external motivation of more profitability. That's already there and that's already part of the ecosystem of the organization. So it's a great place to start. And every organization is different. So it might not be in terms of racial diversity with a particular organization that is focused on a particular community, or if it's religious, that may be a focus. But within the group that is involved and that is participating in this organization, what does that diversity look like in terms of age, in terms of gender, and also looking internally at the staff and what the breakdown looks like from the very top to the bottom, and that can make a really big impact. So there's always somewhere to start and there's always improvements that can be made. It is going to look different for every organization.
So this can be really overwhelming for some organizations, particularly smaller nonprofits who may not have the financial resources to invest in a consultant or a trainer. What are some easily implemented tips and tricks and advice that you can give for nonprofits as a starting point? Because obviously this is a really, really big topic with a wide application area, but where can nonprofits start today?
Yeah. So I would say the first thing is to assess what's happening internally. So that can be done by doing a survey of your staff and getting a sense for, how they feel about these issues, what improvements they think could be made. By taking a look at the data around recruiting and hiring, take a look at who is applying for positions and then who ends up getting chosen. And is there a difference in the makeup of that group? And have a conversations, right? So the first place this can start is to have a conversation as a company around how are we doing when it comes to diversity, when it comes to inclusion, and start having those conversations, surface the issues that are highest priority and move forward. And in that internal interrogation and reflection, also take a look at the space. how similar are we to each other? Oftentimes organizations will fall back on, well, we all have these different personalities and I bring this strength. And yes, of course, we all have diversity in personality and in strengths and skills we bring to the table. But diversity is not just about personality and individual skills and strengths. It really is about those social identities and groups that have been historically marginalized and haven't had those opportunities. So really taking a look at gender, taking a look at race, age, and those different aspects, sexual orientation, to really see, is our organization representative of the population we serve? Is our organization representative of the type of world that we live in, right? Or is it actually look more like a white man's club, right? So really taking a look at what it looks like and what changes we can make to really create the type of organization that looks like the world that we live in.
Right, and of course the business proposition for nonprofits is that there is such a wealth of ideas when we expand the circle of
Yeah.
who is creating innovation, who is bringing
Yeah.
ideas forward, even if the audience that the nonprofit serves is relatively homogenous.
Right. And what's really interesting about that, and one of the things I found so fascinating when I started learning more about this, is that oftentimes people think that diverse teams are more innovative because you have different perspectives. And that's true. You have people with different backgrounds, they bring different perspectives. But what they've actually, in some of the studies, what they found is that each individual actually performs better when they're part of a diverse team. So it's not just that our team is better because we're surrounded by different perspectives, but I, as an individual, am performing better. And so why is that? Well, it turns out that when we're in a group of people who we unconsciously see as being different from us, we actually work harder. So we try harder in terms of explaining ourselves, we're more accurate, and that impacts the overall thinking in the group. So now if the group is overall thinking at a higher level and innovating and coming up with better decisions, and so collectively, everyone is performing their best when they're part of a group that is more diverse, when innovation is your goal.
Now, going back to the realm of microaggressions and unconscious bias, obviously this is a very, very large topic, but I'd like to get into it just a little bit because this
Yeah,
can occur even within age diverse
yeah,
support teams. And obviously there is always the person who feels like they have been, um, is it right to say offended,
mm-hmm. Or
right?
hurt.
Has been made
Yeah,
against them. And there is the person who has made the offense. And most of the times, right, we say unconscious bias because it's unconscious. We don't know that we're doing it. What
yeah,
is a way to cultivate a safety net around people being able to voice their feelings, their hurts, their experiences without necessarily turning it into a situation of victimhood or vice versa, um, creating a situation in which someone, because they did something unconsciously, constantly feels attacked.
yeah.
So we want all these conversations to happen in a safe space, in a welcoming environment, so that everyone can achieve growth and success through this process.
Yeah, definitely. And it's not easy. It's something that a lot of folks are struggling to grapple with. I would say so unconscious bias are those mental shortcuts that our brains take, right? So we have patterns for how we process information, and we've picked up a lot of stereotypes and images in media that influence how we perceive other people. And so these are the gut reactions that we have. And, microaggressions, those can be described as a lot of paper cuts over time, right? That's someone who is either a person of color or maybe a part of a marginalized group that is hearing these messages over and over from society, from their friends, from peers that imply that they might be less than or that they don't belong or that brings that sort of aspect of their identity to the surface in a negative way. So there are a lot of ways these show up, and oftentimes the person who's perpetrating it, the person who said that comment, they don't realize it's offensive until they learn that it's offensive. And so the tough thing is, as human beings, we tend to believe that we're right, right? And we want to be right. And um, we see ourselves as good people. So there is this challenge of when somebody says like, ouch, that actually hurt, right? You hurt me. It can feel like a personal offense. And this is where I think that those of us who are part of a majority group, so if you are white, or if you are a man, or if you are part of the, a younger group within an organization that has some age diversity, that you're really aware of the fact that you may not know if you've said something that offended somebody else. And so when somebody says, ouch, that hurt, believe them, and I think that the metaphor that I think is really great is if you step on someone's toe and they say, ouch, you stepped on my toe, your response is not going to be, well, I didn't mean to, right? Or like, I'm sure it wasn't that bad. Your response is going to be, oh, I'm so sorry, right? And to look and sort of see how that happened. And so that's how we need to be approaching these interactions, is to assume that when somebody says, ouch, that hurt, or that was offensive, or, that's a little bit racist, or that's sexist, or that's biased, to believe the person, right? And to recognize that we probably have a blind spot around that area. And to also recognize that if this person has been faced with these microaggressions time and time again, that saying, ouch, that hurts, if someone steps on your toe every day, right? Your toe's bruised all the time and it's going to hurt. And what maybe would have once been a quiet ouch, it might be, hey, stop standing on my toe, right? Like, you're breaking my foot. And if you have no idea that you're doing that, that can feel harsh and it can feel scary. And so just recognizing the fact that this hurt and has been over many years, over many generations. And so if you feel like the reaction is too strong for that one thing that you said, recognize that it's so much deeper than that one interaction. And that just, even if you don't like the way it's being said to you, doesn't mean that there isn't truth in that feedback. And so to really listen carefully, and to always apologize and acknowledge, and just focus on the outcome. Focus on the fact that you stubbed someone's toe, not on the fact that you didn't mean to, right?
Right. And so conversations about diversity, and especially conversations about inclusion, aren't meant to draw blame or to cause attacks. It's really meant to encourage people to be in a consistent and constant mode of good communication and respect for the other person and consideration for all those around us. And of course, it goes without saying that this isn't just a white man's problem. This is something that we are tasking everyone, whether one is from a majority group or a minority group, to think about ways that they are being inclusive or not being inclusive in day-to-day life, but especially when we show up for work.
Yeah, definitely. And the inclusion shows up in different ways, right, in the workplace. So it can be as small as like, who are you including for lunch, right? And now I know many folks are working virtually right now, so this may not be as appropriate, but when you think about office space and you're going out to lunch, are you always going out to lunch with the same people, right? Who is being included, who isn't? But even virtually, right? When you are doing some work and you're like, oh, I'm not sure what to do about this decision, let me talk to so-and-so, right? So it's not formally a process, it's not a formal meeting, but you're reaching out to somebody to get their advice. Who are you reaching out to? Are you reaching out to somebody who thinks like you, or maybe shares some similar identities as you? Or are you reaching out to someone that you wouldn't normally include in that decision making? And that's also what inclusion looks like at a really small level, is the decisions that you make on who you're going to involve in your thinking, in your brainstorming, in your decision making, or in your social time.
And that's where we're so fortunate to have the wealth of the internet and connection tools like social media tools, Twitter, Facebook, that we can reach out into the vast world and hear back from a lot of sources. And of course, then make the decision of which sources are right for this particular situation.
Yeah, there is so much information out there. And I think for folks who are new to learning about this topic, anytime you hear a word or phrase or concept that you haven't heard of, there is so much research out there. You don't need to wait for someone to teach it to you or to go to a training on it. It's really just Googling that term, learning more about what it means, and reflecting on how it's shown up for you in the workplace and in your own personal life.
Yeah, and of course, we've only scratched barely the surface.
Yeah.
It's such a vast topic. There's so much to talk about. There's so much to learn. And I want to give an opportunity right now, if anyone who is joining us live has a question, to please put it in the comments. But Talia will be available via email to answer any questions. And Talia, I know that you are a DEI trainer and consultant. Can you just tell people quickly what that means?
Yeah. So my background, I actually started working in the educational nonprofit space and in training. And the last couple of years have really focused on consulting, both on employee engagement and on diversity, equity, and inclusion. So that means that I've worked with organizations who've, come to me or come to organizations I've worked for saying, hey, we need help. We have a problem. We recognize that there's more we could be doing to treat our employees more fairly or to improve our diversity and inclusion initiatives. And so I've gone into organizations to facilitate learning experiences, teach them about unconscious bias and other topics, but also helping to address some of the systems, so the recruiting and hiring practices as well. And I know a lot of people who are doing this type of work, and there's no one size fits all. As I mentioned, every organization is different, but there are some common steps that folks can take. And so I'm happy to have an initial conversation with anyone who's interested, learn more about what you're looking for, and help connect you to the right resources. I know a lot of people doing this work and can make those connections.
Fantastic. And Talia has created a wonderful resource for everyone who has joined us today. It's a new to DEI resource page with lots of links and information to get you started. So I went ahead and I shared that in the chat, where you can access it. And those who have pre-registered for our coffee chat will get that in their email right after we conclude our conversation. So I don't see any questions currently in our chat. I'm sure people are wrapping their minds around this topic and questions will come. And this is just the first coffee chat we will have about this topic. So there's a lot more to come. I really want to thank Talia for taking the time to join us this morning for a really important introduction to diversity and inclusion work. And I wanted to let you all know that in 2 weeks, on the 29th, we will not be having our usual coffee chat format because we will be having a roundtable. We are holding a aging and housing roundtable where we will look at the challenges that older adults face in housing, as well as some interesting and out of the box housing modalities that could serve as potential solutions for that. And of course, as we by now know, anything that affects older adults tends to trickle down to the rest of us. So please make sure that you follow our page, follow SoFIA, and stay in touch with us to get our newsletters so you can register for this important roundtable. And thank you so much for joining us today. Talia, thank you for joining us live today, and we'll see you in 2 weeks for Aging and Housing. Take care, everyone.